Hello, everybody. Welcome to our workshop today on a deep dive into Nitro Forms. I appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day to join us on this workshop. We're going to go through a couple of things. First, a few slides to share, and then as we wait for folks to join, we'll kind of go through these slides, and then we will dig into the demos. I'll show you some of really cool features that we have, some different things that we can do with Nitro Forms and with the Forms Designer tool. Really going to focus in on a couple different things. Form event actions and external data columns are going to be the two most important things that we're going to take a look at. So first of all, let me just go through the slides real quick here. We have, this is the workshop today. And then, so I am James Restivo from Crow Canyon Software. I've been working here for about 8 years, helping to develop the products, the applications we have, and also helping to drive the development and of Nitro Studio. Crow Canyon Software, as a lot of you know, we offer a few different products. We have business applications, which are innovative out-of-the-box solutions like help desk and work orders and purchase requests and onboarding, customer service, a number of things like that. Business process solutions. We also offer Nitro Studio, which is what we're talking about today, digging into the form tool piece of it. There's also AI and bot services that we're offering, and we can build out custom solutions as needed based on your business requirements. Nitro Studio itself is totally developed by Crow Canyon in-house here. It is for the Sharepoint on-prem and online world. It works nicely with that, integrates with Teams to a degree as well in the Office 365 space. It's not just about forms. We're going to really be focusing on forms today, but there's also workflows, reporting. You can add in portals, and then there's database integration. We're actually going to talk a little bit about that database and some level of database integration today with the external data columns. But that's what Nitro Studio has. So it's really a full-fledged, full-featured, robust platform. Not just about focusing on the forms, not just about focusing on the workflows, but it gives you all the bells and whistles you might need to build out complex business processes on SharePoint. You can see the Nitro Forms options we have here. The forms are dynamic. They can be responsive, available in a mobile device. You can actually take the form template and apply it to multiple lists. There's an easy way to export it and import it. There's repeating rows, custom actions, database integration, electronic signatures. We'll touch on some of that as we go through here. This is not the scope of this call isn't to go through all this in great detail. It's to really focus on a couple of the more complex things that you might be able to do, like more advanced things you might be able to do with the Nitro Forms tool. If you have any questions on any of this, any of the things on here, any things we talk about today, any questions about Nitro or Crow Canyon in general, there is a questions box on the panel. So if you look at the panel on the GoToMeeting screen, there should be a box for questions, and we also have Scott on the call today to help answer any of those questions as we go along. And anything we don't get answered through there, or towards the end of the call, what we'll do is just start talking through those questions that people have and go through that. So with that, I'm just going to go right into diving into the things that you can do in Nitro Studio with the Nitro Forms Designer. And let's see, let me get out of this, make sure I can get over to it. Let's make sure everyone's seeing what they're supposed to be seeing. Okay, perfect. All right, good. Everyone's seeing the Nitro Forms Designer projects. So this is the Nitro Forms tool on a list we're calling projects list that we have in a particular site. And we've already built out the form to a large degree because this webinar is really more focused on the not just building the form, although building the form is quite simple. As a lot of you well know, you can take your form controls, which are your list columns, and you can drag and drop those onto your form in whichever way makes sense. So you can put on a due date, that already exists, that one already exists, but take some of these things and put them on the form, just drag and drop like that. And there's different things that you can do with how the look and feel of those columns and those forms as they get added to the form itself. And you also have tabs and sections. But what we're really going to focus in on today, more so than that, is a couple of things that I think really add a lot of value to your form for not a lot of effort. We're not talking about custom coding. We're not talking about deep level of knowledge of scripting languages and things like that. Although there will be some scripting we talk about, it's going to be really simple scripting, and it's stuff that we can share and already have on our some of our articles on .help and things like that. So nothing really too complex or too crazy with those scripts that we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, let's get into what our use case here. So what we're using as our use case for this scenario is that we have a list of clients, or a list of customers actually. We're going to use this customers field. Uh, that exist in a database outside of your SharePoint environment, presumably a SQL database. And I'll actually show you, we have this up in our Azure database. You can see we have a list of customers over here in query 1. There's a list of customers coming from our Azure DB, and we have a list of contacts related to those customers on that Azure DB as well. So that's the database we're going to be referring to when we pull in our external data columns. So this is pulling data from outside of your SharePoint site. And the way you set that up is you go into the form settings and you go to external data columns, and then you can start configuring your connection. So the first thing we're going to do is get our customers. So we want to know what customers we have, and this is going to make them available to the user filling out the form as a dropdown. All right. So we're going to pull back that list we saw in that Azure DB, and we're going to show those as available selections for the user. So the first thing we're going to need is a connection string. So that's usually built out with, you reference the server, you reference the database, the user ID and the password, and then I'm saying all that because what's going to happen is I have it actually on a different screen over here. I'm just going to plop it in. It's totally encrypted. You can't see the information because it does contain a password. We're going to test our connection, and so we want to do that every time just to make sure that it's going to work. And hey, look, it was successful, so we're good. And then you do your query. So this is going to be a simple select query where we're going to get some information from that database. And again, I have it pre-written out over here, but essentially, and I'll kind of walk through the anatomy of it just a little bit. For people who use SQL queries, and frequently it's probably going to look pretty straightforward. But I just want to dig into a little bit for folks like myself who aren't really that familiar with SQL queries and things like that. What you're doing is essentially saying, I want to get these pieces of information, the account ID and the account name, from this particular database. And so we can go back over to our SQL database over here, and you can see that that's what we're getting. This is our database. This is our column name for what we're getting, and the two column names for what we're getting. So we're going to pull those two pieces of information from that database into the form. And what we're going to do is, actually, bear with me just one second here. Make sure, okay, get this over here. There we go. Okay. Then we're going to map those things that we're getting, those pieces of information into columns on our SharePoint list. So usually what you're going to need when you're querying a database is a place to put the value that you want to get, which is the account name. And then you're also going to need a place for the ID. That's just a common database reference thing. Whenever you're pulling information from another DB, you want to make sure you pull in that ID. We're going to use it in other places through this demo as well. So it's important to pull that information in. And in fact, we don't really allow you to do it without pulling in that ID. But from the database column, as we know, is going to be account name. And we're going to pull in into the customer field that we created, which is a plain multi-line text field on the form. And we're going to get the account ID and pull that into customer ID. All right. And hit OK. Okay, so as you see, it changes the look and feel of that field to more of a lookup. And then throughout the development, and this is true as you're doing anything with Nitro Forms, most anything, you can hit this preview option in the upper left and start seeing how it's going to function, how it's going to operate. And you can see right here, here's our list. So go back to our DB. Can I do side-by-side comparison? You can see we've got Hurricane Software, Wakefield Health Unit, Logan Memorial, all that's on here. So that's real straightforward. Now we've created that connection between our database for selection and made it available to the user filling out this form. The next thing we're going to want to do though is, let's say we want to pull in those contacts. So we have the contacts list. I showed you that in the DB. We also have that contacts list. So we're going to create another data column connection, and again, we're going to pull back multiple records instead of a single. And we're going to call this get contacts. We're going to use that same connection string we had earlier, because that's going to be a common connection string as long as you're going to that same database, of course. Make sure we test it. And then we'll do our select query. And there we go. But one thing you'll notice we've added on here is that we're getting the same kind of information we got from that account list, but it's from the contacts list, of course. But now we've added in a bit of a filter here, where account ID equals customer. So this is what we call a query parameter. And you can see there's a place to define those query parameters down here. Now, I could go in and use any name in here. Customer probably just makes the most sense, but I could do any kind of name. And this is where that customer ID, pulling in that account ID and mapping it to customer ID is going to come into play. Because we're going to pull back, customer is the parameter. I already had it as part of the query, so we'll just go ahead and use it. And that's actually going to be a number because we're pulling back customer ID. So I could have easily called this customer ID instead of customer just to make it consistent. Unfortunately, that's not what I did, so we're just going to leave it with that. So customer and customer ID. So this is getting the customer ID value and mapping it to this parameter of customer and putting it into our query as a variable. So now you can pull back the contacts where the account ID equals customer. And I'll show you what that does. Is what it actually creates a filtering effect on that list of contacts. So hang on just a second, let me make sure I get this right. So contact name, put it into contact. And then we gotta get that ID field. Contact ID goes to customer contact ID. Now these are fields I created ahead of time, and actually contact ID is not showing on the form at all. You don't need it to. You can just create it as part of the list and leave it in the background. You don't actually need that ID field on the form unless you want to see it. You certainly can add it, but there's no need to. All right, hit OK. Go to our preview. And now you can see contacts has changed to a different look and feel. So when we select our customer, you'll get a list of contacts. You can see right now there's no option available. If I go to Kirkhan Software, now I see those options. So these match up with what we can see in our database. If we go back to our query 3, which is the contacts database, let me just make this a little bigger. You can see the count ID is what we're mapping to. You can see the count ID is 1, and so it has those two values. That's what we're pulling into our form. But let's take it a step further. You want to get the contact email and phone number from that contact in your DB. And you can see that that information is available, email and phone. So we create another lookup here, create our configuration. And we're gonna get contacts, phone, and email. In this case, we're going to be pointing to a single record. So we want to choose single record. We're going to get that query string and put it in, connection string, excuse me. All right, and then we're going to pull in our query, which is going to get some more information. So go to select there. So now we're pulling back more information. We're getting the name, email, and phone number from that database, and where contact ID equals customer ID. So this is going to be that query parameter. So we do customer ID. And actually, I think the naming convention is a little funky, but we're actually pulling back the contact ID. So we actually, because we want to map the phone and email information we're grabbing to the contact that we've selected on the form, and then we can use our column mapping values here to map into contact email, and this is going to be the name from the database. So do contact email, then use the piping, and then do contact email. So kind of internal and display name. In this case, the internal and display name are the same in the database. You can verify that by coming over here and see contact emails, no space. That's the name of the column we want to get and map into this contact email field. And we're going to do the same thing over here where we take the contact phone and contact phone, typing contact phone. All right, and then, so there you go. That's what we pull in, and then we hit OK, OK, preview. So now we're getting the customer, we're getting our contact, and then you see immediately contact, email, and phone populate into our form. We can select another one. You can see right there, it's got the other person's information, bringing it into the form. There's one final piece of information we might need. There could be others, but one more I'm going to show you for this demo is the customer status that we can pull in. So it's going to be the same idea. We're going to go and create another external data column setting, and we're going to get the customer status. So get customer status. Again, this is going to be a single record. Let's see, just selecting my connection string. All right, connected to database successfully. Then I'm going to get my customer status. So this is what, where we want to get the parameter is account ID. So we're going to pull in the account ID, map it to the account ID. So it's account there. It's going to be a number, and we're going to pull in, map it up to our customer ID. Hit OK, and then we're going to map in the status to status. Actually, I believe it's customer status is the field I want to populate it into. There we go. Status. Hit OK. So there's your mapping. Hit OK. So you got all that going on there, and we're going to do a preview. And Corcana software, you can see now, is marked as active. And then we're going to pull in our person and get the information. So we can also do it where we pull in, say this one's inactive. We actually get a pop-up here. So I'm going to dive into that in just a second. That's happening through form event actions. But I just wanted to show you that, you can mark it, it'll pull in inactive as well, because it's based on the customer. Okay, let me pop over because that's what I wanted to show you for the external data columns piece of it. And let me just, are there any questions, Scott, any questions on the external data columns that we can answer?
Yeah, okay. There have been some questions I've been trying to keep up with. One was number of records you could have in the drop list pulled in, and the person asking said she had about 200, and I said that should be perfectly doable. I think if you get over 1,000 or more, you start to get kind of unwieldy operations with, and it's a long list anyway, 1,000 or more. So, but I think 200 is perfectly possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think SQL, and this is kind of where the Sharepoint limitation comes in. SQL has like a bit of a lock around 5,000. So more than that, you might get into trouble. But even with 200, you're still going to have a lot of selections to choose from. I'll show you this in just a minute. A couple different things you can do. You can do a search down here. We can actually enable your users to do a search on that field. And then you can also do a type, start typing into the field as well.
Yeah, and now define, matching.
Yeah, so you do a search.
Match entry.
Right. So you Crocanian, it's going to go and search. So I guess we have Crocanian related to all these somehow, but it's going to pull back the information you want. So Wakefield should probably be. Whoops. Help if I spelled it right. field. I don't know. It's pulling back all of them for some reason, but that's the idea. Is you can have a search field that you can do a search query and get back the information you need on the
Right, to
from
make
the
it easier for
database.
the users. That's right.
Hmm.
Right. And another question is, once you pull the information into the into the SharePoint form, you can save it into the SharePoint list, or you could re-pull them from SQL, I guess. That's kind of the question. Is it, where's the data reside? Once you
Hmm.
save that form you just had, like project name, project X, and the client is so and so. Once you once you create the form and
Hmm.
choose information from SQL, it's on the it's in the SharePoint list at that point, right?
Yeah, it's in the list, and so until you go and edit the form, and so in the edit mode, you're going to be able to go and select maybe a new value or see a new value. But until that point in time, it's going to be living in the SharePoint list as a string, you know, as a string. Basically, it's going to have that ID. It does have the ID related to it, so there is a connection. But if you make updates to your database in SQL, they don't automatically make updates to the SharePoint list item. So if you have
Yeah.
a SharePoint list item that you haven't edited, but you've made a change in SQL, you may not see that change come across
Until you like kind of
until you go
refresh by
and
re-choosing the client or something, right?
edit. Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
You could do kind of you could also add a refresh button on there, I think, or something, if we wanted some kind of
Uh,
like, yeah, we'd have to
yeah, I
work
think
that out.
we can talk to the dev team about that. But yeah, any
Okay.
other?
Yeah, one is about if your SQL Server is on premises and you're using Office 365, could you connect from the SharePoint form, the Nitro form, to the database that's on premises,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all tied into the query string that we're talking about, that connection string.
the connection
So
string, right?
right. So this connection string they put in here that's all kind of blanked out at the moment. This is where you're telling the system to go to get the to get the information. Right.
Right.
So whether it's on premises, whether it's in the cloud, ours happen to be Azure DB, but it could be an on-prem SQL server. As long as you can connect to it from your SharePoint environment, you should be fine
And you
to
would
get
not
that
need a
information.
special Microsoft connector on premises data gateway or anything like that to do that.
No,
No,
no, I
you
don't think
just
so. No.
only thing you need is have the proper entry points in the firewall
Yeah,
to allow
yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah, like I said, as long as you can get to it, you can see there's I'll pull back some information. I'm not going to pull back the password, but some piece of that connection string, I'll
Yeah,
just
yeah.
put it
Well,
into.
okay, we kind of got that. But another one is, what about
Yeah.
we read from the data source? What about writing back to it?
So that writing back to it, we have to handle a different way. There are tools in our system in Nitro for invoking web services, and that's likely the best way to handle that is through a web service REST API kind of call.
Right. When you save the form, one of the
Hmm.
scripts could run is to one of our workflows would execute a script, a web service, invoke a web service that would then take data from whatever entries were relevant on the
Hmm.
form, such as update the, I don't know, address of the company or something like that, or whatever. And then
Right.
it would take those fields that the user entered and write it back to the database, kind of doing the reverse. Or, well, it's basically a write to SQL instead of a read. I mean, that's all it really
Exactly.
is. And
Exactly. This is
you have to have. I mean, same. It's another kind of SQL query in a sense, but it's a write to it. And as long as you can do that with your REST API, your web
Mhm.
service, it's perfectly possible. And you also, of course,
Yes.
have to have permissions on the database to do it. You can't do it without
Yes.
permissions to write to it, of course, right?
That's
So
exactly
that's a
right.
couple of them. Let's see if there's other questions. I'm going here. Um, how many connections can you make? You can make as many connections as you want, right?
I believe so. I don't know
Yeah.
that there's any upper limit on that because I know Microsoft does have some limitations in a SharePoint list of 8 to 12 lookup columns, which actually includes person and group columns. This I don't think falls under that restriction. So I'll double check with my dev team, but I don't think there's necessarily any restriction. Because really we're not calling this data, and this is something we do in Nitro forms in general, is we're not calling the data into the form until someone goes and clicks on the list on the dropdown. Whereas in SharePoint, as soon as SharePoint lookup, you're going to be the SharePoint's going to be loading all that data all the time, which is why they have that limit of 8 to 12 or whatever it is. And I just saw a question pop in about multiple data sources.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
Yeah.
right now, I mean, if you think about it, this contact and client list, I mean, they're tied together, but they're really two different databases. They just happen to be in the same, two different tables, I should say, in the same, and they just happen to be in the same database. But certainly, there's no restriction on calling a different database to pull in a different data into your form. So you
Right.
can, yeah, certainly can have other databases in there as well.
Yeah. You could have any, could have on-premises for ones, and it doesn't have to only be SQL, SQL. There could be other databases at all. It's not SQL is not the only option. Any ODBC compliant database should work.
Right, right. So yeah.
Okay, good. So it's a very interesting topic, external data connections, because it's so important, of course.
Right, exactly. And so just peek through some of these other questions. Looks like some of you answered. There was one about pulling multiple records. You can only pull 2 columns. Actually, that's not true. You can pull more columns, as much as you want, and then map it in. The trouble with pulling more columns is that you have to have a place to put them. So one thing you'll notice is if you look at the single record ones, we're pulling back a single record, but we're pulling back more data. We could pull in way more data than this, and then you can have any number of mappings down here. It's when you're pulling in multiple records that you really can only pull in the ID and the title reference, and then you can reference, and then you can use that information and start pulling in more data from that reference as a lookup. But if you have a single record, if you're pulling back, trying to just look for a single record, you can pull back as much data from that single record as you want. So it's not limited to just those two.
Okay. Okay, good. So one was about connecting to other SharePoint lists, data in SharePoint lists in another site or site collection. And for that, we'd use our advanced cross-site lookup tool. You don't need to use the external data column.
Right.
And
So you have this create cross site lookup column, and yeah, so you
right,
can pull back data from within your same tenant, same on-prem
form.
server. Create a column. I'm just going to use that one because that's what popped up.
Yeah.
And then it's going to look at the site where it is, and see, this
What
one
list, what column?
is,
Yeah.
yeah, I think this one's limited to, well, anyway, there are ways to do. I don't know off the top of my head which one, but there are ways to get information from across a different site collection.
The point is, it's a different app than the external data column connection.
Mhm.
It's a inside SharePoint connection that we already have inside as part of the forms designer already.
Exactly.
Can you create a list or write to a list once a ticket is saved? We can create a list. If you want to, when you save
Yeah.
an item, you can create a list using Nitro workflows, or write to a list once the ticket is saved.
Yeah, we might have to get more details on that one, but that's certainly all possible. Creating a list or writing to a list, that's
Well, we
certainly
have
all.
the update list item function inside of Nitro workflows, and that will write
Mhm.
to any list. So if you can create a list and then write to it. So normally the expectation is if you're in a like request management list, of requests or tickets or something, you'd be writing the ticket, saving the ticket or the request to that particular list that you're creating it on. But you could save it and write to another list. In fact, we do all the time, don't we, James? Like with tasks and subtasks, projects and subprojects. That's just
Yeah.
creating an item in another list, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking. That's like a very common function to update list
Yeah.
item in another list, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yeah.
do it all the time with the custom actions. Yeah. Yeah. You can
Yeah.
do custom actions on the form.
Custom
Just
actions or
a little
workflows.
outside the scope of this call, but just I'll touch on it real quick. Is that you can put custom actions, script actions. You put these things on your form and then build out those custom actions we're talking about. One of them being potentially that invoking the web service. Since we're kind of talking about it, let me pop it open, and we'll go ahead. I guess we'll just edit this one. That's fine. There's this invoke web service one that you can do, but it's also like adding list items, updating list items, things like that. Creating a list itself. Well, I don't know about creating a list itself, but yeah, we'll have
Well,
to.
we could do it. Execute a script would do it for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's
You
true.
would
We could
just
do
you would
that.
just write a script that
That does
create
it.
list. You have to have the list name and all that, but presumably
Right.
that'd be on the part of the form.
Exactly.
Yeah. In fact, you
Yeah.
create another site even if you want. I mean, all of course depends what permissions you have too and all that.
Exactly. And so this we'll dig into in a little more, just a quick plug for our upcoming workshops. In November and December, we're going to do a deep dive into custom actions. So we can dig into those things in more detail in the next couple of sessions we're going to have on Nitro workshops. So we'll dig into some of these things like executing scripts, invoking web services, and things like that. All right, good. So certainly happy to field any other questions about external database columns, our data columns. But I think what I'll do interest of time, I'll move over to our form event actions piece, which is where I want to show a few more a few more things that we can do with our form that I think are pretty neat, pretty cool, pretty easy, to be honest with you, that will give you some flexibility and functionality that's really pretty nice. Let me see where I want to start with this. Hang on just a sec. We want to go to, yeah, so we're actually, what we're going to do is we're going to start with that pop-up that you saw when I had picked the inactive account. So that's handled through form event actions. And so this is where we're going to get into scripting, but don't worry, it's going to be really simple. What we're doing is setting up an alert when a customer is inactive. So if the person selects a invalid account, inactive or otherwise, then we're going to throw some kind of notification up to them. This is going to be based on when the column value changes, and this column value we're keying off of is customer status. You can have other column values here, and we'll see this as we go through more form event actions. You'll see that you can have any number of columns in here on the column change. You just want to be maybe a little cautious about how many you have, and be cautious of infinite loops and that kind of stuff. But then we're putting a condition around it to say when customer status equals inactive, we're going to execute a small script, which is going to do a pop-up message. And so we called it, just gave a pop-up message, but this is the script right here. It's pretty straightforward. It's an if then else statement. Really, really straightforward. If if the conditions are met, it's going to throw a confirmation box. So the script is confirm, and this is the what's in red is the text that will appear in that box. Then you're going to get an alert with an OK button. Say thank you for confirming if that's okay. Or you can do please choose a different customer. I'll show you what that looks like. So do a preview. And oops, I changed my customer thing. Let me get that back to where it was. Take that search off. Make it a little easier. There we go. All right, so printing dimensions I know is inactive. This customer is inactive, so that was what was in the red text. And I hit OK. Thank you for confirming. So we're saying we're going to create a project for an inactive customer, but we've confirmed that that's okay. And so we're going to move forward. It allows you to keep going. So you can do there's other ways you can do validations around that. We could do a custom validation, column validation on over here to prevent saving of the form if it's inactive. But at least at the first step, you can just inform the person like, hey, you're doing something that may not be what you want to do. And of course, with this text, you can put whatever you want on there to tell them whatever you want to tell them. And then so you can add in other things in here as well. And that's just a really simple pop-up message that will just alert the person like, hey, I need to, you need to think about this maybe. So that's that one. And then let's see. Then some of the other things we can do here, we're actually going to switch over to a different site. Let me pull up our IT site. All right, so this is the ability to auto select or auto set values in a field. So you'll see on here we have an equipment needed field. what we're doing, just as I walk through it, I'll show you. When you select a category of new hire, you can see the equipment needed field appears with the choices that are there available, and then the person can go and select the things, the equipment the person might need. So I know this is a fairly common request in the IT world, so this hopefully you guys will find useful. The really cool thing that what form event actions is going to do, it's when you select what type of staff, which we happen to have an issue type, you can see it pre-selects some of those values. And then if I go in here and select office staff, it selects different values. So you can see, go back to field staff, barcode scanner, laptop docking station are all checked off. Field office security badge, laptop computer all needed. Mobile devices needed for both. There you go, switches, dual monitors, landline, desktop computer for office staff. Now you can expand this concept to have more selections and more fields and more things available, but that's really at the base of it, what you're doing. And this one's fairly straightforward to set up. So if I go to our form event actions, we have the set equipment form event action I've set up. So we're going to do this execution on column value change. So anytime that issue type field changes, it's going to run this. And that's actually going to be true anytime that issue type changes, but we have additional conditions in here that help drive it. So in each one of these, there's another condition so that when issue type equals office staff, then go ahead and do something. And the values, we're actually just inputting directly into this value field here. So we're putting in for the multi-select choice field, we're putting in the value, semicolon, space, next value, semicolon, space, next value, et cetera, et cetera. So you can do that for multi-choice selects. You can do that for, I think that'll work for, well, if you wanted to just populate a single line of text field kind of thing, you can do that pretty easily. And then if we cancel out of that and go over to our field office, you can see it's the same thing. Issue type equals field staff instead of office. And then, we just have a different set of values in here. So it makes it really nice, kind of slick, neat way to pre-select some options for users based on what they've selected in previous fields. And you can kind of drive, what the user's experiencing and what they're seeing through that form of an action tool. All right. And then, so that's the setting of those fields by kind of automated process. Let's see, a little more, a couple things I want to go into that are a little more advanced with what you can do with the form event actions are fetching list items, kind of like a query in a sense, and then, well, it is a query actually, and then doing calculation. So instead of using the Sharepoint calculated columns and things like that, we can actually run a calculation through form event actions. But first I want to show you the querying of information. So you'll see on our form, I've added a couple fields here. And this actually, real quick, this ties back to that question about querying data from your site, from within SharePoint. This is actually a way you can do that from within, not just custom actions or using the cross-site lookup. You could also do it through this fetch form event actions tool. And what I've done is I've created a database over here, just a real simple table of, here's the person's email address, here's their supervisor, here's the department. And that's the information we want to pull in. So if we go to our form event actions, this one I'm going to create. And I'm going to get employee supervisor and department. All right, I'm gonna do this on count value change, which that's gonna be request for email is the value that's gonna change. We can also execute this one on form load if we wanted to. And then, we're not gonna have any conditions around it. So we're gonna do this fetch items action. So when we fetch items, one thing to note is that this CCSQL, you're gonna reference it later. This gets appended to the front end of whatever you put in action title. So what I actually did before was a QL employee data, but that didn't really make a lot of sense. So just you don't have to QL or anything. You just do employee data. That's the information we're getting. And then you can see where, which site we're getting it from. So we're going to pull it from this particular site happens to be the same site. We're going to pull back one item, and we're going to pull back from this employee data list. We're going to do a query builder, add a condition, and this is going to be where title, which is the field in our employee data column here. And then we're going to map it to requester ID. So the way you do, or map it to requester email. So the way you can do that is using this percentage, and then you just do the internal name. So requester email is the internal name of that column in SharePoint, and just do percentages around that. You might see these percentages in some of our articles or some of our suggestions on how to reference things. It's a way to create a variable within a condition statement. So title is going to be equal to requester email. Well, where do we get requester email from? We're going to get it from the form itself. So it's a variable. It's not a direct string value. So we're going to get that information this way with the percentages. All right, and then what do we do with that data? So now we got to do something with that information. And this is kind of true with our query list action and both workflows and custom actions. You build the query, then you got to do something with that data. What do you want to do with it? All right, so we're going to do update a form control with this data. And we're going to do update, update supervisor and department, and create our mapping. So the way you get that data, okay, do employee supervisor. So the way you get that data is you use the reference. So let me just back up for a second. We're going to do we're going to do CCSQL employee data, because that's the name of our query control or query action. Say update. We're going to do mapping. All right, employee supervisor. So we do CCSQL employee data. So again, it's just that CCSQL added on to the name of the query fetch thing we did. And then you can do the hash hash. So this is going to allow you to get that supervisor value. And it's really just supervisor, which is the name of the field on your employee database. So kind of another way, kind of similar to that external data column function, but a little it's a little different.
Well, one question that came up here, James, is don't we have the user info filler that does read from Azure Active Directory directly?
We do. That's absolutely true. This is I'm using an example here where the information is not included in the Azure AD. And there's also a limitation to how many fields we can pull back using the info filler. I think it's about 5 values that we can pull back using that current user info filler. So this allows you to extend it even further and get more data. And probably a better use case, probably one I should set up, is not employee data, but maybe customer information. So now you're getting data from a list that is your list of customers or contacts or whatever that is internal to SharePoint, but and so you'd use a form of actions instead of the external data column. But it isn't information necessarily that would necessarily be in your Azure AD.
Huh. Okay. Right, because our user info filler is very much used for filling in. If you put the person's name who's filling out the form, could get their department, email, phone number, manager, and all that stuff. Or
Exactly.
that's already set up to read the SharePoint user information or the Azure AD, depending on how you want to set it up. But
Right.
form event action goes way beyond that. That's what you can do.
Exactly right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. So we do employee data, like maybe the or maybe location or something like that's not in your Azure AD. But there's there's use cases for it. But the concept is that you're pulling in data from a SharePoint list based on this based on this information you're getting from this list. Hit OK on that. We'll hit OK on that. Hit OK on that. Then do a preview. Now you can see employee supervisor and department is not filled out for admin account because that's not a value we have over here. So if we do a change to, let's see, James R, it takes a minute, but then it fills out admin account IT. So that's the information coming from our other list in SharePoint, custom list in SharePoint. So we do Pavan, who's the other one there. There, pulls it in. The other thing too, that sometimes a supervisor field, at least in AD on-prem historically, and I haven't looked into it in Azure AD recently, but it's been more of a difficult field to pull in and not something directly available through that user info filler either. So that's another reason you might want to use this for internal employees as well. All right, and then let's see. So any other questions on that? It doesn't look like it. Okay, so then
No.
Okay. So then we'll move over to our next form event action, which is to calculate information. So you'll see on our form here that we have some fields for dev hours, dev rate, project management cost, and project budget. Now we want to get the project budget from the values entered here. And that can be done through this form event actions scripting. So we have a particular script that could be used, like here, I'll write it up. So we're going to do calculate project budget. So this can be done in form load and column value change, and then columns that are changing are going to be the let's see, dev rate, estimated dev hours, and project management cost. All right, so anytime one of those fields changes, we're going to make a calculation. Oops. Shoot. All right, there we go. And then we're going to create an action. And this one's going to be updating form controls. So we're going to do calculate budget. And this one's going to be a script. So we're going to do budget, let's see, project budget. We're going to do format using JavaScript. So we start out by defining a couple of variables. So one's going to be dev hours, which is going to be this string here. So I'll type this out. This is kind of a common string you can use to reference field values in our in the form itself. So UI.fetch column value UI. Then we're gonna get the column value is going to be estimated dev hours. So whatever's entered in this dev hours field, we want to get that and map it to this variable of dev hours. Dev rate. And then just to make it easy on myself, I'm going to take this, copy it. Just double checking for any typos, because then it'd just be copying the typo. And we're going to pull this from dev rate. So this is just a quick note. This is actually the internal name of that column. When I created these columns for the demo, I created them without spaces. It's generally easier to do things when the column doesn't have spaces in it. Otherwise, you'd have to put in this, what is it, like underscore x00. I mean, I don't know exactly offhand, but I think it's something like this. We have to put that to represent the space. But I mean, that's okay if you do it. You just have to make sure you get the actual column internal name, which I can show you in just a minute how to do that as well. And then we do var project management equals. Do this. Let's see, should I copy it? Copy, paste, and then we do project management cost. And then we're going to do our calculation. So this is another kind of simple if-then statement. So do if dev hours and, so do ands with 2 ampersands, dev rate and project management. Actually, I'm just going to do the first two. Then we're going to return, and this is where we have our calculation. So all the rest of it is pretty common. You can copy it from. We have a article that has information about this. I think it's. I'll pull it up in just a minute. But then we can do our calculation. So it's going to return our variable dev hours, multiply it by our dev rate, and then we're going to add project management. Project management. So these are just the variables that we defined up here and put into the calculation. And then we do, see, and that, and then turn, whoops, there. So it's just like that. That's all you really need. Once you have this and you define your variables, it's really a matter of playing around with this calculation to determine what you want to calculate. So it gives you a way to, now project management is, our project budget is not a calculated column. It's a number column. So this gives you a way to do a calculation and input it into a number column without having to use a calculated column, which has a lot of restrictions in SharePoint. Some restrictions in display of it and things like that. That's really all it is, just that script. We hit OK, go to our preview, and we'll skip down to our budget. So we're going to do estimated hours, our dev rate, let's say it's 150. So now, because both those things have a value, now we get a number here. But anytime these things change, it's going to recalculate on the fly in the form, which is another restriction with calculated columns. You don't see the number until you've saved the form. This allows you to see it on the fly as you fill it out. And then if we add in something down here, like $5,000 for project management, it adds it automatically into that project budget.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Especially since it does it on the fly and not like having to save it and all this other stuff. One person was asking, one person we know well was asking about where we can find info about the scripting. And I said in our manual, croqueting.help, but also we have scripting examples available because we do this quite often, this kind of
Yeah,
scripting work.
yeah. So
Croqueting.help.
we have some information here. So you calculate. I think it's under calculate date value dynamically. So this is the one that I kind of keyed off of to do this, get the script. And you can see down here we have that script where we're defining the variables and then doing the calculation. And then if you go to our manuals, and go to some of these things, I think we have it in forms. Let me see.
It's under custom actions, I think.
Well, there's custom actions. Before event actions do have a slightly different context, slightly different syntax.
Yeah.
Camel
Camel
queries.
queries.
Yeah, so this is where I was talking about. See, here's that exact example: SQL data, employee data coming from ID. You can get information, other information from the JavaScript, and then here's some other examples down here of JavaScript, advanced conditions. So we have this advanced conditions option where we can kind of even do more advanced variables. I didn't get into this for this call, but it's something we probably should talk about at some point in one of our webinars. I
Well,
didn't want to get too heavy into scripting on this webinar. Really, is more about empowering power users that aren't necessarily developers, like me, essentially. And hopefully that's what we got out of it.
yeah, I think the point is that there's a lot you can do with the Nitro forms and workflows that don't require scripting or any kind of custom JavaScript or fetching or camel queries or SQL
Mhm.
connections. But we wanted to make the point that if you do need that level, it's just the next step up from the basics of the form designer to get very complex and fully functional forms going that really meet particular business needs. So there is the element of our forms designer that's very intuitive, easy to use without any of this kind of scripting. But James in this webinar has gone into some of the deeper, that's why it's called deep dive, into the more complex actually more powerful features of what you want. If you want to rev up your forms with custom JavaScript and everything, and this form events action and the external data connections, then we have that all very available. It's the point of this webinar.
Exactly. And one thing I wanted to, one of the questions we had was about doing like a tax rate in display mode. So right now this is read only. I can't change this field. So I just want to make sure I answer that question. You can make it so it's not editable, and then it's just accepting whatever calculation you put in it.
Oh, I see. So if you put like a tax rate of 12% or something, like 0.12, it would always use that calculation and you would never change because you don't want the user changing the tax rate.
You could do that. Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Or well, actually better. I mean, you just embed that tax rate as part of the form of an action. You don't even have to display it. You could
Yeah.
display it, just have a description and say tax rate is 0.12% or whatever it is.
Oh,
But
yeah.
you would just put that as part of your part of your whole thing here is just say, so let's get that, do, times,
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Makes
0.12 or
sense.
whatever.
How about like could you have one of those fields that are calculations be a drop list? They say the tax rate's 0.5 in one place and 5% one place, 10% another place, or for different items or something, products versus services. Could you change
Yeah,
if you dynamically change the drop list, it would change the calculation, right?
I think I absolutely think you could. I mean,
Yeah.
one kind of way off the top of my head is you could do this kind of scripting and just say, okay, here's in the one scenario, it's going to be 0.12, and you hit okay. But then you're going to have conditions around it to say, okay, add condition when this drop list
Yeah.
equals like the project,
California or something,
project budget. I thought there was a department or something field on here. Yeah,
yeah,
department.
something, whatever the
When
field
department
is. Yeah.
equals X. Let's see if I have a field here. No, I don't. We don't have anything in it. But when department equals X, use this one, and then you'd have a different calculate budget action here. Basically the same thing, but with a different rate. So absolutely, yeah, you could have that. And so to make the fields read only, so this is something that we do with our permissions. So this configure permission is read only, and you can see we have it applying to new, edit, and display unconditionally for everyone. So no matter what, it's a read only field for everyone at all times.
You can also have that field only show up in a display mode too.
You could. Yeah, and actually initially when I was preparing for the webinar, it wasn't this was unchecked, but that was because we had another permission over here to hide it in the new form. So we're always hiding in the new form, department, and for whatever reason, and project budget. So then it would be hidden.
Yeah, right. We have three different forms: the new, edit, and display.
Mm-hmm.
And one
Exactly.
person was asking about changing the background of the form. Like, oh yeah, we can change the back, make the look and feel of this form, do all kinds of twists and tricks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just we got the question. Might as well dig into it a little bit. There's a whole
Well, just the
UI piece of
background, the
this.
colors, the theme. I mean, we haven't, that wasn't the point of this webinar, but yeah, we'd be glad to show you the range of possibilities of modifying the look and feel. In fact, there's our Nitro form show. Yeah, there you go, right there. It's just one of, but there's a Nitro form showcase showing James did up a W4 form that looks like
Oh,
very much,
yeah. I
all
don't know where
kinds of.
it is. I
Yeah, it's
forget which
under
one it
it's
was in.
under our website under Nitro Studio Forms Showcase. But
Yeah,
yeah, let us know what you want to do. We have a lot of fun with that, changing the form, what it looks like, and colors,
absolutely.
tables, text boxes. I mean, just
Yeah.
whatever. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
built a
we
lot
yeah
of
we
that
can
into it.
definitely yeah we can definitely do a one-on-one demo to go through the forms, other forms pieces in more detail. Because really, saying it again, this was more of the advanced stuff that you can do with it. Um, kind of like a level up from the basic building of the form. But the basic building of the form, there's a lot you can do with it, and we'd love to show you. If you're not familiar with it already, we'd love to show you a demo of it. So reach out, schedule something. We'll get it on the books.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always feel that same way, James, when I do webinars. Like 1 hour is just scratching the surface of what's possible. So
Yeah,
it's always good to know what specifically people are looking for, and then we can talk to them directly.
that's right. That's right. Well, good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We're actually going to hit our hour exactly. Look at that. Really appreciate the comments and questions. And if there's anything that we didn't get to answer on this call, let us know. Real quick before we go, just to let you know, I did kind of tease it a little bit, but I'll re-mention it. There is going to be a couple of workshops coming up in November and December where we're going to dig into those custom actions. Kind of the same idea. We're going to do a deeper dive into these custom actions tools that are custom actions. Um, more than just the basics. I mean, you can add a list item. You can send an email. Those things are fairly, straightforward. But this is we're going to take it a step further and talk about maybe more complex business processes and invoking web services and things like that. So we'll be talking about those in our November and December webinars, part one and part two. And then we also have an upcoming webinar later this month for improving government service with Microsoft Teams, Office 365, and SharePoint, given by Scott, who's on this call. And then also coming up in November, we're going to do another session on bots with Microsoft Teams. That's a really, really cool feature that we have, that you can add bots to your teams and interact with our applications. So it's really pretty neat. But yeah, that's about it. Feel free to reach out. Appreciate everyone's time on the call today, and we'll hope to hear from you soon. And yeah, any parting words, Scott?
Well, just thanks, James. Good webinar, workshop. Appreciate it. And hopefully people will get in touch and want to know more and find out, ask any questions. We're here to help.
Yep, absolutely. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Goodbye.